So today I'm joined by Chris Bealey, who's the head of Data Science Strategy Unit for the NHS Midlands and Lancashire Commissioning Support Unit. You spent years working on modelling across the NHS. Why do you think there's a renewed urgency right now around operational forecasting and the data-driven decision-making in healthcare?
Yeah, so there is a lot of urgency, but I feel like there's sort of always been a lot of urgency. I feel like I've been working analytics in NHS for maybe like 25 years now. And I think the thing is, we've always been really kind of aware of the benefits, and as a profession, we've kind of really promoted because it's been underutilized. There's a lot of analysts in the NHS, and I'm sure in lots of industries, get frustrated because they feel like their insights and their kind of work isn't driving decisions. And I think that tale is as old as time, really. I think what's new is, well, firstly, the potential of technology, I think, and analytics these days. So the thing that I would point to in particular is the use of R across the NHS. So that has been growing and growing and growing. I've been using it myself for about 15 years, and certainly with the advent of the NHSR community, it's seen more and more use. So I think analysts increasingly have access to better tooling, and just better advice, more communities. As an analytical profession, I think we've done a lot to grow ourselves and grow our reach and our impact. So I think that's one thing. I think the other thing is that the NHS, it's always been a constrained funding environment. I have worked in the NHS for 25 years. We've never, I don't think, really had a good year, particularly. But there is a relentless pressure, relentless focus on, efficiency and doing more with less, and what's the art of the possible. And modelling. Particularly the modelling my team's doing at the moment with Sizing Hospital, it is really focused on, looking at basically constrained resource envelope, a certain set of activities, of estates, of all these things, what is possible, and not only what is possible, but what is an equitable distribution of those things. There's lots and lots and lots of analytical work that shows that actually healthcare resources often go to the groups that need them the least, the least deprived groups. And there's a lot of insights as well from analytics in terms of like looking at that, understanding why it happens, and looking at ways of kind of helping to target, interventions in healthcare where they're needed.
For those who maybe doesn't know what that is, could you explain exactly what R is?
Yes, basically it's a programming language, essentially. It is a programming language like others that people may have heard of, like Python or C. But it's a programming language that is very particularly designed around statistics and data and graphical representation of data. It's been around forever, and it's been used. When I started using it, I think in 2008, it wasn't visible in the NHS. There were bits and pieces of people using it, but it had no visibility. There was no support. There was no help. It was very lonely, miserable existence. And these days, it is everywhere. With the advent of the NHSR community and NHS England have put out lots of stuff about R. There's a big focus now. And what's so brilliant about R is that it gives you power, basically, to do more with your data. It allows you, instead of being kind of constrained by the kind of the software that you're currently using, I always say, if you can imagine something, and if you've got the right team around you, you can pretty much build anything in R. It's particularly used for kind of like reporting and dashboards and statistical graphics, because it is really designed around the notion of clear, kind of accurate statistical representations of data.
So I guess it's really relevant now, especially if we're coming into the age of AI, where data is basically gold dust.
So actually, I think the other thing that's new or that's growing is just the amount of data. So I started using R years ago because I was processing, I think we had about 300 surveys every month. And it's very difficult to process that amount of data using traditional methods. So I started writing computer programs in R that process that. But obviously, with the advent of paperless and, EHRs and, the amount of tooling and the sophistication of the models, the amount of data is just growing and growing and growing and growing and growing. There was a famous example during COVID where people were passing around spreadsheets with data in, and there weren't enough rows on the version of Excel that they used. There weren't enough rows, and they actually dropped the bottom. And that's such a good example of where, we need to use the right tool for the right job. People use what's in front of them, And that's not always right. And I think we've been on a journey. I've been on this journey with the NHS to like getting better tooling in the hands of better trained people who are more aware of kind of what works and what's going to deliver the best.
You've spoken about the importance of reproducibility and transparency in NHS analytics. In your opinion, what do you see as the biggest barrier to achieving this consistently at scale?
So I think this is, I love this question. There's two main barriers, I think. Number one is fear. And there are two elements to that. The first one is the people writing the code are worried that they'll look stupid. And I totally get that. As frustrated as I am, I 100% understand that, because everyone's code is terrible, honestly. You know, nobody ever reaches that point where they think my code is so amazing that I just want to show it off to the world. You know, I employ some really, really excellent data scientists, and they constantly look at their own code and think, oh, what was I thinking? And rewriting. And that's how it is, you know? And I think the solution to that barrier is we all just need to, and, you know, I think with the NHSR community, have been encouraging people to do that. We all just need to show our homework, basically. We all just need to, it's a bit like tidying a house, isn't it? Nobody likes to know that you've got a messy house, but you know what? We've all got messy houses, haven't we? And once you realize that, it kind of takes that fear away. So that's fear number one. I think fear number two is at the top end. So there's the fear of the people actually writing the code who are worried their code's not good enough and they look stupid. And there's the fear of the people who are employing these people and who are managing them. And I think the thing there is, I think for me, it's all risk. That's the thing, you know, managers are trained to think about risk, and it's a good frame. You know, I use that frame all the time when you're thinking about what to do and not do. Risk management is clearly key. But I think the problem with a lot of people, because they didn't grow up in this culture, you know, like the culture in the NHS is so, as I say, back in 2008, there weren't all these open source repos and people doing hack days. And, you know, it wasn't visible. So the people at the top now haven't come through in that world. And so when they look at us all throwing our code on the internet and, you know, chatting about it and sharing it, like, they don't see the benefit. They just see the like, what if I look stupid? What if one of my team does the wrong thing? What if? And I think the solution to that is, well, honestly, I think the solution to that is, honestly, we should just all just get on and do it, basically, and just prove to the world that the sky doesn't fall in. And my team, I mean, it's really important to me, but it's also really important to my team. They really care about sharing code. I suppose that's the number 3 barrier, which I've just thought of, actually, which is it's not a priority. You know, people like to make a nice shiny tool and show it in a webinar, because of course they do, because that's what you're supposed to do. But they often leave off the work of making it open. And there is some work. It's important to be honest. You can't just bang out loads of code and put it on the internet. That's not necessarily safe. You need to think carefully about what you're doing. You need to make sure you're following the right coding practices. You know, there are things to do and things to think about and risks to manage. And I think for the reasons I've already given, that isn't given a priority. And I think we just need a culture shift. It is absolutely a priority in my team. I prioritize it. My team prioritize it. We believe in sharing code. We share the most trivial, ridiculous nonsense. Honestly, we share things that no one cares about. And we share big, business-critical, million-pound models. We share them all like alike because we believe in it. It's a value that we hold. And yeah, the NHS is talking more and more about sharing code, but I want it to be doing more and more of sharing code.
The NHS serves a huge range of users, and you've got things like clinicians, planners, analysts, all the way to executives. From your perspective, what makes designing data tools for the NHS fundamentally different from designing tools in other sectors?
I think there's a couple of things. I mean, obviously, you know, one of the big things is we are so careful with data. We are so incredibly careful with data. And as, for example, what Jess Morley in the Goldacre Review talked brilliantly about, once you lose the trust of patients, it will never come back. So that's a very kind of sacred thing, is that we have our number one duty as a kind of analysts and kind of data architects and so on is to maintain trust. The second thing I think that's different is we are kind of like a monopoly or a monopsony or whatever the exactly technical word is. You know, we are sort of the only game in town, and so that puts us on the footing of serving everybody. So, I mean, when I think about data science, when I try to like understand how to, do things better. So, for example, I look at Netflix. Netflix's culture is very try stuff, move fast and break things. That's the famous thing that came out of Facebook. And that's great. And it's really inventive. And, you can really understand why that's such a helpful culture. But the thing about Netflix is if you hate Netflix, just use something else, just go, I don't like Netflix anymore. I'm going to use something else. But we don't really have that. If you're a doctor and a truster, if you're a patient, if you're a carer, whoever you are, we are the only game in town. And so it doesn't matter what your literacy level is. It doesn't matter what your first language is. It doesn't matter whatever about what kind of member of staff you are, where you live. We have got to make sure that we're building stuff for everybody. And that's a hard thing to do. Again, I look at the civil service for this. They're really good at thinking. They run things like the renewing your driving license. That is a service that is for literally everybody, not even just for users of healthcare. And so they think really carefully about making sure that it works for everyone. And it's hard, but obviously it's really worthwhile, and it makes our products better. And I think the third thing about that's different, and this is the thing that, I mean, I love it. I've only ever wanted to work at NHS. I've never wanted to do anything else. My entire family works in NHS, and I love it dearly. But the thing that I don't like about NHS, and I understand why it's the way it is very risk averse. All of it is risk averse. So the example I always give is if you're doing brain surgery, I mean, I've never done any brain surgery. I don't know anything about it. But I imagine you have to be very careful, and you have to follow a very strict protocol of what you do. You can't just come in the morning and just think, you know what, I'm just going to use a different set. I'm having a bit of I've been inspired on the way here drinking a coffee. Nobody would want that brain surgery. But that doesn't apply in my world. That's what I sometimes wish people kind of understood, is that the whole culture of the NHS is very like, follow the book and be risk averse. And obviously, as I mentioned at the beginning, that does apply to looking after data. Absolutely, 100% always. But actually, sometimes you can just mess around. You can just do something stupid for 2 days and see what happens. And I see that culture in the likes of Google and Netflix and all the big data science players. I see it there. And I don't think we've got that culture yet because we haven't taken the time to grow it as a kind of independent entity. And so I think that's something else. I think we can be a bit slow. And yeah, I think that's something I've kind of always wanted to encourage people to do, is just mess around, take risks. Don't take silly risks with data, but do other things. Do things wrong, make mistakes. And that comes partly back to the point about sharing code, doesn't it? Just make mistakes. Do things you're not sure about, just have a go. And, nobody will die. Unlike when you're doing brain surgery, if you make a stupid dashboard that everyone hates, nobody will die, basically.
What's the most surprising lesson you've learned about what makes analytics products stick with NHS users?
So I do really love, I love working analytics because it's this kind of like, I feel like there's two sides to it. It's a very sort of like yin yang kind of thing. So I think when people come into the profession, or when people think about it, they think about it as being a set of correct answers, basically. That's how they think of it, is there are things that are correct and there are things that are wrong. And a great analyst will just know those, basically, and will be able to make judgments about, see new things and kind of sort them into boxes of, oh, this is true and this is false. And I think what I love about analytics is that really only takes you a very short way along the journey. I think in your kind of career as an analyst, almost immediately you'll find yourself thinking, well, actually, there isn't a right answer here. People are saying things to me. I'm going to meetings where people are all saying different things. I'm making arguments. I'm writing papers. I'm doing analyses. And actually, there isn't a right answer. I can't give an equation that proves that I'm right. That's not the territory that we're in. So I think what I would say about sticking is, well, the first thing that I've really, and it's so unbelievably obvious that I can't believe I didn't realize it before, but I think lots of people haven't realized it, which is why I'm talking about it as much as I can. People don't really think about the perspective of the person who's ultimately going to be using the thing that they're making. People kind of do it as a series of correct answers. So they get all their statistics and their graphs and their data, and they do it all correctly. And they almost just dump that on the head of they go, right, there you go, there's the answers. and they don't really take the perspective of that person. Like, how much time have they got? What's their background? What questions? And as I say, I'm almost embarrassed saying this because it seems so unbelievably obvious. And yet I haven't really thought. I mean, obviously I've thought about it here and there throughout my career. I've only really thought about it deeply in the last 2 years. And the reason for that is because we built something in my team that a lot of people are doing a lot of important stuff with. And it just becomes really obvious straight away that it's really important to think about what's in their mind, basically. Not only what is their user experience like, but also what conclusions are they drawing? So I think that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is, it's really important how people feel. And that, again, like, analysts are a funny bunch, really, because we kind of, as I say, I think we come in to be correct. We all go to school and we get all the right answers and we think, I know I'm going to get a job where I've got all the answers. And then you get this job and you don't have all the right answers. And that's actually not the job. And I think that's what's so interesting about it. So I've been to loads of meetings talking about decisions and analysis and data and, you name it. And the aim of that exercise isn't, again, to kind of dump a load of facts on their head and say, right, here you go, we're right, move on. The aim of that meeting is to kind of, to firstly, to understand where they're coming from. And secondly, to kind of like talk to them where they are and help them solve their own problem and have them leave the meeting feeling like I was helped, rather than I went to a meeting and they just told me I was wrong for 45 minutes. Because however correct you are, that it doesn't work. And all you'll find is that people don't like being wrong. That's the thing. I mean, I don't know. Who does? So they ignore you. And I think there are lots of analysts who were kind of shouting. I used to be one of these, honestly, and probably still am, kind of shouting into the void, I'm correct. Why is nobody listening to me? And that's why nobody's listening to you, because you're not thinking that you're talking almost to yourself. You're talking in facts to a bunch of people who don't want facts. They want solutions. They want to understand. They don't want to understand all the equations. They don't care. They're not bothered. They don't have time. They want to understand, why does this matter? Help me make a decision with what you're saying.
We're going to touch back on to R, which is you're a founding member of NHS-R community. How has that community changed the culture of data science across the NHS in recent years?
The novel on being community has done is show that, and that's my number one point always, and I mentioned it with Open Code actually, is can you see someone else doing what you're doing? And that is such a human thing. And I didn't have that for a long time. And it's hard. It's hard to, and honestly, I doubt myself a couple of times. I did it for years. And I did. There were a couple of times where I sat myself down and no one cared. Honestly, nobody cared. And I just thought, like, what am I doing with my life? Is this really even helping me? Like what? But I plugged away, and now everybody thinks I was brilliant, and so it worked out in the finish. But it was honestly, it was a lonely road. So I think that's the first thing. Is I think it's just shown people that I'm like, you know what? There's a way forward. Like, you can do this. And I think the other thing that is so great about the NHS-R community, I mean, I think it's such a good community, is that there's a cultural element to it. And so I think, I don't think we deliberately, who does deliberately develop a culture? I don't know really, but the culture we ended up with was, I think there's two elements to it really. I think the first element to NHS-R is we love beginners. Like, that is our absolute favourite person in the world, is someone who is, you get them in the Slack occasionally. I've just installed R, what next? Like, literally that. They're just sitting here just at the beginning. And I think in a lot of tech communities can be quite difficult sometimes. I'm sure tech people listening to this will agree with me. But we're the opposite. We all come running with cookies and, praise, because we're so excited. And I think the other thing the NHS-R community is so brilliant at is just having a go and, just making mistakes and just it's being okay, So I think, I mean, I am a lot of, I don't want to overplay my hand here. I think quite a lot of people in the NHS-R community know who I am. And I think there's this perception, and I have to say Hadley Wickham, who's a big ARC programmer, is really good at this. There's a perception that kind of you're sort of senior figures in a community or in a sort of tech group or whatever it is, write perfect code and never make any mistakes and, type 180 words a minute. And it's just not true at all. It's just, in fact, if anything, in a way, I actually think the ironic thing is, I think your real power user is the one who screw up the most. Because actually with great power comes great responsibility. So some of the biggest messes I've ever seen in my career are for people who were very, very, very smart trying something. And the one thing, I've banged on about this slightly too long, probably because I love it so much. The other thing I want to mention about NHSR is another thing I find frustrating about the NHS, and I think this is a Ben Goldacre quote, the NHS isn't a whale, it's a shoal of fish. It's lots and lots and lots of hundreds of organisations. And they don't like helping each other. Honestly, they don't. And I find that bizarre and always have. So people, like you talk to people, say, oh, I work for the NHS. And I think they think we all just work in this big building and we're all friends with each other. But the sad reality is that's not how it is at all. Actually, there's a lot of people who don't want to help people in other organisations. And I just think that is so, we're all public servants. We all get paid from taxpayers' money. My work is your work, your data is my data, all that kind of thing. And again, the NHS, we don't even care if you work for the NHS, honestly. You could be an academic. It doesn't matter who you are. We don't care. And that is very different to NHS. The NHS is very, there are lots of pockets of, I'm not saying this is a universal thing, but there are people I've met lots in my career who I've got my territory and I built this and I'd like to keep it for myself. Thank you very much, kind of a thing.
I know that we've been talking about making mistakes and how it's important. But for those teams who need to, they get something wrong and they're trying to move from experimentation to adoption, what do you think they should try and do to help really make that successful? Are there any kind of steps that they should really keep in mind to make sure that that isn't a successful process for them?
This thing about adoption I think is really important at the moment, actually. I think that this to me is one of the big issues that I see. So again, looking at thinking about like private industry and thinking about the NHS and so on, I do feel like the NHS and maybe the broader public sector as well, I don't know that territory as well, is still a bit stuck on kind of demos and interesting dashboards and kind of, I still feel we're slightly stuck at the kind of almost like a prototype stage. I don't see a lot of really good work being put into production. So I think this is something I really want to see more of. And I don't pretend that I have all the answers or I can do everything, because I don't. And so we are working on a business critical model. And, there's lots of stakeholders, there's lots of use of it. It's finding application. I think a mistake that data scientists make is that people want data science. That doesn't solve their problem. Just asking for data science doesn't really solve their problem. What people are going to pick up the phone and ask for is a solution to an actual problem. And I think that solution will nearly always include people who are not data scientists. And Netflix is such a good example of people who use tech at a very, very high level. They got their own tech stack. They do all this amazing stuff. I think it's much more obvious to Netflix why Netflix can put data science in production so easily with what is essentially, I imagine, just basically a bunch of data science engineers, because they're running an internet platform that's autonomous. And that is a problem that lends itself very easily to, hey, let's stick a recommendation engine in here and off it goes. Great, brilliant, done. In the NHS is not like that. The problems our customers have aren't those kinds of problems. They're not dealing with clients in that way. They don't conceive of the world, that's just not a good analogy for the kind of things that my team are doing. So the first thing I often say to people now is, you've got to think about, don't sell data science, nobody's buying it, sell a solution. I'm just going to keep talking about this as much as I can until I feel the problem's gone away. Think about your users. Think about them early and often, because you can't do too much user work. Just think about potential users, think about actual users, future users, you name it. Think about them, talk to them, cater to their needs. Because if you don't, you will end up with £1 million of something that no one cares about, basically.
And so would you say that that's the biggest takeaway that you hope people come away from when you're delivering your session at Big Data and AI World is, think about your users, make mistakes?
Yeah, data science in the real world, I think, basically. But I suppose what I want to talk about is making it matter, basically.
Mhm.
Making it matter in terms of, yes, thinking about users, yes, thinking about being experimental, but also keeping it running.
Chris, thank you so much for speaking with me today.